All right, welcome everyone. Today is March 28th, Saturday afternoon. We are all theoretically home and to keep the promise of the social distancing. So Chinese people are pretty good at listening to the authorities, and I'm sure officer will confirm that. And so it's our great honor to have you today to give us this lecture. And Si Yu is going to first introduce the officer to our audience, and then we will go directly jump into the topics. All right, go ahead, please, Si.
Sure, thank you, President Len. So it's a great honor for CPCA today to have Corporal Pokrop to join us. And I had the honor to meet the officer for, I'd say probably now over 2 years in the Citizen Police Academy. Officer Pokrop works at Swatara Township Police Department, and he is in charge of many different programs that have been very successful involving the community. And he is also the instructor for the Citizen Police Academy, among various other programs for officers as well. And I would ask kindly that Corporal talk a little bit about himself first, so that our members who are participating in this Zoom session will be able to know you a little bit better. And then we'll start with the topics listed. How about that?
Sounds great. All right, go ahead, please.
All right, so yeah, my full name is Brandon Pokrop, and I've been with the Swatara Township Police Department for a little over 13 years now. And to give you a little bit of background on me and my journey into law enforcement, when I got out of high school, I was like many people. I actually had no clue what I wanted to do with my life. I went into college actually as a business major. I just want to make sure before I go any further, can everyone hear me okay? Is the audio coming through?
I can hear you fine.
Okay,
Great.
I just want to make sure. When I went into college as a business major, I had an older brother at the time who got into law enforcement in Lebanon County. I didn't come from a military background, and my brother was the only one in both my primary and my secondary family who got involved in law enforcement. So when I was in college, I actually went to Penn State, and when I was in college, I did some ride-alongs with my older brother. He was working for Untitled Township Police. If you guys know where Lebanon Valley College is, that's kind of their jurisdiction. And doing those ride-alongs really provided me the opportunity to see what law enforcement, at least in Pennsylvania, was all about. And particularly municipal policing, which is more community-based, as opposed to a little bit more broader approach is what the state police would be involved in. So I switched my major to criminal justice, and shortly after I got out of college, I graduated in May of 06, and I went right into the police academy. The police academy is a 6-month program. Back when I went, it was a 5-month program full time, and it's the hour equivalent is about 2 to 2.5 years worth of college crammed into about 5 months of schooling. So after I finished up my bachelor's degree, I went right into the police academy. And while I was in the academy, I was very fortunate to apply and get offered a job with Swatara Township shortly after my graduation from the academy. As with most police officers, I started my career in law enforcement in the patrol division, where I spent 6 years. And obviously really learned a lot about the job. I mean, that's really where you learn the ins and outs of policing. It's really an eye-opening experience, because up until that point, I was very much under the mentality that the world was rainbows and butterflies. And when you engulf yourself in law enforcement and unfortunately, you see the negative side of human nature, people who have the ability to commit horrific crimes, and more importantly, I'd say people who become career criminals. Unfortunately, it takes a toll on yourself and on your family. So I learned a lot in my first 6 years of my career. In 2013, I had the opportunity to go through promotional testing. I was able to get promoted to the rank of corporal, which is the next level up from a police officer, from a regular police patrol position. And at that time, we had an opening in our community services division. So I took that opening, and I've been working in community services ever since. So I've been there for almost 7 years now in community services. And I have now flipped to the side of more positive the positive side of policing, if you will, because in my current position, it allows me to work with people who like the police, so to speak. You know, kind of they support the police, such as you know, CU and Penn State and a lot of other contacts that I've made over the years. And really my job now, my responsibility now for the police department is anything related to community outreach. So doing seminars like this, I go into Swatara Middle School and I teach at the 6th grade level. I teach kids about anti-bullying, drug violence, status offenses. They learn the difference between rules and laws. I oversee our internship program, our ride-along program. I also run major events for our police department to include the Citizens Police Academy, National Night Out, our 5K run, which is a fundraising event we have in the fall. And also we run a youth program as well for kids in the summer. We have a lot of other events that we do, but those are the major ones. And then I'm also the accreditation manager for our police department. So we are one of a little over 130 departments in the state of Pennsylvania are accredited. And we've been accredited for 11 years now. And I oversee that program for our department. So it's my job to make sure that our department is staying up to date with policy and the proofs that we have to show to be in compliance to keep our accredited status. So that's kind of the law enforcement side of things. On a personal level, just real quick, I won't spend too much time on this, but I am married. I have 2 kids. I have a 14-year-old daughter. I have an 11-year-old son. And I'm originally from Connecticut, and I grew up in actually Berks County, just south of Reading. But I've been living in the Lebanon area for the last 6 years here. So my brother and I, we own a gym in Myerstown. So between my main job as a police officer and owning a business and having 2 kids that are, you know, pretty active, I'm a pretty busy person. So, but I kind of like it that way. And I've been fortunate enough to be invited here to talk to you guys. So I am calling you from my home. I've been in isolation for a little over a week now. And that might be a good segue as we get into the topics here. But just so you guys know what law enforcement is doing during this time dealing with COVID-19. I can only speak on behalf of the police departments in Dauphin County, but what most of the departments are doing is they are rotating officers out in 2-week intervals. So I was one of 5 officers that were considered non-essential. And when they say non-essential, really the main thing that we're worried about in law enforcement is obviously public safety. That's priority number 1. And so our patrol division is made up of 32 officers, and it's split into 4 different platoons. So the idea was taking officers who were not part of the patrol division, which includes myself. We have a heavy truck enforcement officer, we have a school resource officer, and then my direct supervisor. All of us were put into quarantine, if you will, even though we were not exposed, but we were put into a reserve status for 2 weeks. So my 2-week reserve status actually ends on April 6th. And during that time, if any one of our patrol officers were to become exposed or potentially exposed to COVID-19, they would be removed from the patrol division and we would take their place. And I believe the chief's plan at this point is to continue that process until we know that this thing is on the downslope. So right now I'm kind of isolated to my home, practicing the social distancing that everybody else has, and that's obviously to ensure that if, you know, heaven forbid, one of our officers does get exposed to COVID-19, that you know, obviously it doesn't put our whole department down. So that's the whole intention of the reserve status. So I apologize, I'm not in uniform. Otherwise, I would normally be in uniform, but I don't have those here with me. So, but I would welcome, if it's okay with everybody, just to kind of keep this informal, and that way, if people have questions that come up during any of the topics that we discuss, that we can address those, you know, as we go along here. And I'll certainly do my best. And I'm the type of person, if I don't have the answer for you, I will get you the answer. So I don't want to give you bad information, but you know, hopefully what we talk about today is somewhat helpful to everybody. So
Sounds great. People will be less nervous when they ask you questions, especially in such informal. All right. Thank you very much. Yes.
sure.
Yes, go ahead. Yeah.
All right. So now what I have, I just want to make sure we're on the same page. The first one I have is the crime in the local area, pre and post social distancing measures. Is that where we're at?
Yes.
Okay. And then from there, we can go right into safety tips. I have gun safety tips, and then also my perspective on security devices that are currently available. Okay. I just want to make sure nothing else was added. Those are the main topics that we're covering today, correct?
The only thing we probably can address at the end would be the teenagers driving. We have one participant left this in the comment line. Teenage driving and secure doors.
Secure doors.
Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate on that? What would be your specific question regarding secure doors?
Breaking-ins, like for the crime. It's part of the crime, you know.
Okay. You mean at home?
Yeah, at home, yes. What would be the best way to secure the door and the windows, such like this? Yeah. Okay.
All right. Those are all good topics. All right. So we'll start with crime in the local area, pre and post social distancing. So the dynamics of Dauphin County, just so you guys know, is made up predominantly of municipal police departments. So there's 67 counties in the state of Pennsylvania, and roughly 1,200 municipal agencies. The police departments in Dauphin County are considered to be larger departments. Any department that's more than 20 officers tends to be categorized as a larger department. So when you look at Part 1 crimes, as defined by the FBI, the Uniform Crime Reports, your Part 1 crimes are your more serious crimes. So those would be your felonies, like your homicides, your burglaries, your rapes, your arson, robbery, etc. Your Part 2s would be your property, predominantly your property crimes, and your assault crimes, your less severe assault crimes. So it'd be like a misdemeanor offense, simple assault, could be thefts, and thefts really include retail thefts, paper thefts, identity theft, disorderly conduct, harassment cases, those types of things. So now I have not been in the office since it's been about 8 days for me almost, about 8 days. And so I really can't comment on what the post results would be. However, I can tell you that our officers, I can tell you the traffic enforcement, the proactive side of policing, those numbers are going to be down. Our directive for the police officers right now we are also trying to limit our social distance, we're trying to promote social distancing with our officers as well. The way that we're doing that is our chief came out and told us when this started that our proactive activities, such as traffic enforcement, was to be kept at a minimum. So police officers, you'll probably find, if you are out and about, you'll find less police officers on traffic stops. We're really being told not to do any traffic enforcement unless it's negligent or a problem for the public, so to speak. So like reckless driving, endangering the public. But for somebody, just simply, running a stop sign, if there was nobody else nearby, we're not conducting those proactive traffic stops that we normally would be doing. So the other thing that we're doing is typically at least with our police department, if somebody calls for the police and we have to go to somebody's house to take a report, usually that's what would happen. We don't really make a whole lot of phone calls unless the complainant is specifically asking for a phone call only, that is. So what we're doing now is the cases that we typically would go to somebody's house or business to take a police report, we are trying to handle as many complaints over the phone as we can. So that's one difference between what our police department's doing now and prior to COVID-19. So I don't, now up until the time that I had left, you know, keeping an ear to the radio and looking over our RMS, which is our records management system, we didn't see too much of a change in crime reporting. I believe that the crimes that you would typically see decrease in this matter when it comes to social distancing are going to be your property crimes and also your disorderly conducts. Most people are adhering to what the governor's orders are. So staying inside, staying at home. You have people that are out of work. The other thing too that plays into this is any alcohol-related offenses. Since the state stores have closed, and you know, people aren't dining out on the weekends, you know, they're pretty much getting their food to go. It decreases the amount of people who are actually going out, possibly, you know, drinking alcohol or attending social gatherings, especially what would have been a very busy sports season. Looking at the NCAA tournament that was canceled, we would see an increase, you know, on the weekends, especially as the weather broke, with alcohol-related offenses. So I would imagine when this is all said and done, if we were actually to pull data, we would probably see somewhat of a decrease in those types of offenses. So the disorderly conducts, intoxicated driving, and you know, other related offenses. The other thing that will be quite interesting, and I'd have to follow up with CU on this, would be to see if we actually have an increase in domestic violence cases. We see this a lot around the holiday season, where when people are off work and they're spending more time around their own family, unfortunately, we all understand that sometimes when you spend too much time with certain family members, things get out of control sometimes, and the police have to get involved with domestic relations. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if we see an increase in domestic violence cases during this time. Again, right before I left the department to be isolated here, we didn't see any increases or decreases in this area. It was kind of business as usual for us. But when I became isolated, it was around the same time, it was right after that Governor Wolf had issued the stay-at-home orders for the counties, which has now increased to 10 counties, and then also the businesses, the non-essential businesses being open. So that would all play a part in our call volume. So we typically see increases on Mondays and during the work week with business-related offenses. So I would imagine that those would probably be decreased as well. And it'll be interesting to see. I'd have to run those numbers probably, you know, pre and post, and that would be data that we would have available to look at through our records management system. Does anyone have any questions regarding that or any comments?
Brendan, I think we have a question in the chat. A member asked, we are at countryside, how much security concerns we really have, which I think is referring mostly to after the social distancing started. And because, you know, there is a running concern in the Asian community that, you know, being targeted, you know, as target of attack, right? Because the news out there kind of highlighted some of these isolated incidents, which may not necessarily be true for respective local areas. So you can comment maybe a little bit on that, and also whether there's a difference between urban and rural areas.
Sure. Well, to provide a little bit of peace of mind, the law is actually written, there's an ethnic intimidation law that kind of covers those types of situations where somebody would be targeted simply because of their ethnicity. So in this situation where you have the potential of the Asian community being attacked because of where the origin of the virus came from, and like you said, the negative picture that the media, you know, was painting in some of this, that's a good point. I would just tell people, you know, I wouldn't be paranoid. I can tell you that I've been staying in contact with the command staff at our police department. We have not received any messages, any notifications, any alerts that this has been occurring. And our chief and our command staff is pretty good. We also have an intelligence officer, Lieutenant Chateau. He attends monthly meetings, crime meetings, to kind of stay up on things like this, on threats that are going on in the area, and also through PASIC, which is a statewide assistance network that the state police use, but we also have contact with. At this point in time, I'm not aware of any credible threats of people targeting the Asian community. So I would just ask that you be vigilant as always, and just you know, adopt what we typically encourage is to adopt a no joke policy when it comes to things like this. So if there is something that is said to somebody, whether you believe that person is either trying to just make light of the situation or crack a joke or whatever it may be, whether they meant you know, to do harm or not, certainly, you know, we would encourage you to report it to the police, because we don't want it to spiral into something where either a group of people or an individual would take action on. If that changes CU, I will certainly get that information out to you. At this time, though, like I said, I have not heard of that being the issue right now. I think people are very much still in, you know, not as much shock right now, but they're still in that kind of isolation mode. But it's not to say that something like that could happen. You know, Harrisburg City is a predominantly black and white city when it comes to the demographics. So I don't know, you know, what that percentage of the Asian community would be in Harrisburg City. But obviously you have to be a little bit more vigilant because of the more dense population in cities. So when it comes to the differences between rural and urban, those are issues that we typically would see more in an urban setting. So again, I would just encourage people at this point, and when this is all over and we're all socializing again, just to adopt that no joke policy. If you have somebody who's, you know, being irate, and it's in reference to, you know, any type of demographic, you definitely want to dial 911 at that point and kind of get the police involved so that that person doesn't, you know, take it to the next level. So that's a good question.
Here's another one. Here's a question. Governor Wolf issued a stay-at-home order for some counties. Who's enforced this order? And I guess the extended question would be: are there any curfews in certain counties? What should we take note for that?
Yeah, I know Dauphin County, Lebanon County has not been included in that just yet. I know there's 10 counties, some of which are the surrounding county. Berks County, I know, is involved more toward the Philadelphia, where they saw the, where they've had more cases of COVID-19. So the problem, and to give you the best example of this, the problem with these orders that are coming out, sometimes they're not clarified when Governor Wolf is putting them out. So I go back to the example of the businesses. On March 6th, when he made a proclamation about all non-life sustaining businesses closing, unfortunately, at that point in time, there was no reference to the law of the enforcement side of things. It, at that time, was just a suggestion by the governor. It wasn't until the 19th, I believe it was, when he came out and actually, you know, made that proclamation, but he actually put it in writing and referenced the law where the enforcement would come from. So these stay-at-home orders, I haven't researched those orders specifically because it doesn't affect me yet, because I work in Dauphin County and I live in Lebanon County, and neither of which of those are on that stay-at-home order. However, if you go to the governor's page, I believe I can actually, the Pennsylvania page is a good resource. That's where you would find the laws that would govern this. And let me just get that for everybody here real quick. The page that I I typically would use would be.
Excuse me, Corporal Pokrop, could you share your screen, or you're using different device right now on the Zoom?
Yeah, I am. I'm actually.
Okay.
A lot of the information, I mean, it would just be going to governor.pa.gov.
Okay.
So the state website, which is fairly easy to find, even if you just type in Governor Wolf, you'll find it on the top two. But
Can you search it and then share it on the screen? Yeah. Sue is going to do it. Yeah.
Oh, Sue's going to do. Okay,
Yeah,
great.
yeah, you're good at talking, and she does the working.
I was going to say she's probably much better at it than I am.
Right.
But yeah, to answer that comment, you have to be careful because the governor can make suggestions and he can issue an order, but unless it's actually in writing, it has little enforcement value. Now, the governor does have the right to control egress and degress into certain areas. So he can restrict travel. Based on what I've read so far about the stay-at-home orders, he's pretty much, there's a long list of places where people can still go. So it doesn't mean that you're confined to your home for a certain amount of time and you can't go anywhere. He is allowing people to go to doctor's offices, grocery stores to get basic needs. And I think the intent of this order was, again, to, kind of force those who are not taking it serious to remember to stay at home and only go out if it's absolutely necessary. Because they're still finding that a lot of people are just kind of going out their merry way, business as usual. So with the stay-at-home orders at this point in time, we as the police, we have no direction or orders from our commanding officers to go enforce these stay-at-home orders, because at this point, it's not going to be something that you would be cited for. You just kind of want to keep in mind, especially because it hasn't hit Dauphin and Lebanon County yet. That's what I've read so far. Again, I haven't had the opportunity to read those extensively. Yes, so that's a good resource, the website that you guys see there, to stay up to date with current updates that he's putting out, the news briefs, and then also any order. There's a lot of links that they include in these articles where if you want to see something that's in black and white and where the enforcement part actually comes from. And actually I think what we're looking at now is that long list that I was talking about just a second ago. And you can see what he's, trying to promote there. Now, like I said, the problem that he ran into before was he made a suggestion for the businesses, but it was not enforceable. Now he actually cited, the section and said by proclamation, but he had to put it in writing first in order for the state police and the municipal police officers to actually enforce it. So I would say if Dauphin County or the county that you reside in eventually becomes part of this stay-at-home order, then you're going to want to review, obviously, that list and just adhere to it at that point. But at this time, the only thing that law enforcement is being directed to enforce from a legal standpoint are the non-essential businesses remaining open. And let's see, were there any other questions regarding, before we move on to the next topic?
I think we can just keep going, and if people do have a question, we can always come back to talk about it.
Sure. All right, so talking about safety tips on family and personal self-protection. All right, so there's a lot of information to go over here. I'll try to do my best to kind of blanket some of the things that I promote when I'm asked to talk about this topic. And I'll kind of loop in family and self-protection all in one thing, and then we can kind of talk about, what your rights are when it comes to home defense. But first off, safety tips on family and personal self-protection. So you kind of have to make that decision. Some people are comfortable if we're talking about firearms, and it's not always about owning a firearm, but let's just talk about that for a minute. The concealed weapons permit would allow somebody to carry a firearm, on their person in a concealed manner to and from their work, to and from wherever, within the state of Pennsylvania. Without that permit, you would only be permitted to bring that firearm to and from your place of business or target practice, more or less. So it's actually illegal to carry a firearm in your vehicle unless you have a concealed weapons permit. So, but a lot of people that I talk to aren't comfortable carrying firearms. It's not something that they want to do, especially what I found talking to people is if you don't really grow up around firearms, like your dad or your grandfather or whoever, never really had firearms, typically that kind of carries over to your upbringing. And then eventually when you become an adult, you usually don't transition into that unless, you're, either you educate yourself about it or you become involved with somebody, in the military or law enforcement wise that kind of gets you interested in actually carrying a firearm. At least that's my experience talking to people of their comfort level. But when it comes to personal safety and just in general, and then we'll get into how you can keep yourself safe at home. But if just in general, what I do try to promote to particularly females and younger adults would be possibly taking some type of self-defense class. There are many martial arts studios out there that actually offer that for women. And that's going to do two things, actually. It's actually not only going to, give you the skills to protect yourself if you were physically attacked by somebody, but it also instills confidence. So, and that goes a long way. You find yourself being less paranoid when you have the confidence knowing that, if somebody were to attack you, that you would know exactly what to do. And then we also try to promote, actually, forethought. So if you're going into an area, and this goes back to just having common sense when you're out and about, we tell people there's obviously safety in numbers. So if you're going into an urban area, for example, an area that you're not used to going to, and you have the opportunity to either walk to and from your car with a group of people, then you want to take that opportunity because a lot of criminals are opportunistic in the sense that, if they see a group of people, you're less likely to become victimized as opposed to if you were just, by yourself. That's number one. Number two, keeping things like your car keys or your house keys in your hand, so that when you get to your car, you're not looking for your keys, through your purse or in your pocket, that you can open your car, get right in, and then lock the door to your car. Keeping things, close to your person, your purses, and again, I get more questions like this from females than I do males. So a lot of this sometimes is geared more toward females than it would be, but it's good practice really for everybody. Keeping, again, common sense in mind where you're not keeping valuables that aren't necessary on your person, things like your social security card, things like your checkbook, birth certificate. These are things that some people actually still keep in their purses that you want to leave out, so that if you were attacked and somebody were to get those items from you, that you don't become a victim of identity theft, after any type of personal crime is committed. So group in numbers, making sure that you're parking in lit areas. Sometimes we get questions about how do you know if this is a rare situation, but when you hear about all the cases involving people who are impersonating law enforcement, know that the statute is actually written to protect you if you're ever pulled over on a traffic stop and you don't feel comfortable pulling over where the officer initially turns on their lights and siren. So a lot of questions that we get, especially in rural areas, if a police officer is behind you, and we get more of this in a situation where an officer might be driving an unmarked unit, how do you know it's the police? First and foremost, any police officer in the state of Pennsylvania must have red and blues. So if you have a vehicle that's behind you and they're just flashing a red light, that is not the police. Likewise, if they're just flashing a blue light, that's not the police. A blue light, one blue light in Pennsylvania typically means that it's a volunteer fireman, and they shouldn't be trying to pull you over for anything because they don't have the authority to do that. But let's say you do have a vehicle behind you and they try to conduct a traffic stop, and you're in an area where you don't feel comfortable pulling over, or whether it's because it's not safe, because it's a curvy road, or it's just not a well-lit area, and you're not familiar with the area, you are allowed to slow down your speed and then find an area where you feel safe. So we always encourage people to get to, if there's a parking lot or an area where you see a large shoulder where you can just pull off, and also a well-lit area. And, that kind of makes it a little bit more safe for you, especially for those situations where you hear about somebody impersonating a police officer. I will tell you that those cases are very rare, at least in my experience in Dauphin County. Typically, when those types of cases occur, unfortunately, it usually involves the same individual who is violating, multiple people. So, and it sometimes can be a mental health issue, sometimes it's not, but usually it's not a group of people that are committing those types of crimes. So, but not to get too far into that, that's just, another thing that you can kind of keep in mind, that, if you ever question a vehicle that's behind you that's trying to pull you over, so to speak, you don't have to pull over right that second, right at that minute. As long as you don't increase your speed, you can travel a mile or two safely and get to a safe spot. And like I said, the statute is written to protect you in that manner if you don't feel safe to pull over immediately. So just kind of keep that in mind. With family and personal self-protection, the other thing that we like to promote is that if you look at other less lethal options for people, so let's say you're not comfortable carrying a firearm with you. You may be comfortable carrying pepper spray or a taser or a baton, all three of which are legal for you to carry. So again, we get this question a lot with females. If you're typically a person who carries a purse with you, if you're a female, and it's usually large enough to carry one of those three items in it, that could be also something that, if you're trained with, that could offer some self-protection, if you're ever attacked by somebody, or even just having it out if you're kind of entering an area that you're not familiar with, and somebody just kind of keeps eyeing you up and kind of makes you feel uncomfortable. So they do make tasers that are designed for civilians, that can be effective. And then of course you have pepper spray and mace, pepper spray and also a baton, which is just more or less a steel rod that's expandable that we use in law enforcement that you could keep with you to protect yourself. So those are all good things. Again, kind of instills a little bit of confidence, and an extra tool, so to speak, should something happen to you. When it comes to children, you want to make sure, especially if you have, very young children, I'd say, a child under the age of 5, a child that may not necessarily know your phone number off the top of their head, or may not know their address right off the top of their head. It is important to keep, current photos, portrait style photos, if you will, on your cell phone. And also a big thing would be making a mental note of what the child is actually wearing, particularly their shoes. So when you talk about child abduction cases, one of the things that the police are going to focus on is obviously an updated picture of what the child was wearing, but particularly if you have somebody who tries to abduct a child, and they try to change that child's clothing, more times than not, they're not going to have a pair of shoes to switch that child out of. So remembering what type of shoes your child is wearing that day. And I'm talking about situations where you're going, maybe you could be going on vacation, you could be, maybe you're visiting Hershey Park, or, places where there's a large crowd of people, where the potential is greater for a possible abduction to take place. Those are the days that you really want to be, cognizant of, what the child is wearing, and, actually having your cell phone with you with a current picture, because that's what law enforcement's going to be looking for you, or looking for when they talk to you, if that were to happen. And of course, that would be an extreme case. when it comes to your self-protection, family protection at home, there's a lot of different things that we could talk about. I would tell you that the biggest thing you can do to protect yourself in the home is really to lock your doors, windows, doors, and just be vigilant. Really when you're walking into your home and when you're leaving. So, and to give you an example of that, and I don't know, it was kind of a shock to me when I met my wife. She's from Tower City. She was raised in a home where they didn't lock their doors. It was common for them. They lived in a big farmhouse, and they would leave for a few hours and they wouldn't lock their doors. To me, it sounds crazy, but I believe that there's probably a lot of people out there that don't lock their house door. They don't lock their garage doors, meaning the door that's actually connected on the outside of their garage. And they also don't lock their car doors. So I would tell you, if you have the ability to use a garage, use it. Pull into the garage and close the garage door before you actually get out of your car. That way anyone, can't just kind of walk into your garage and take advantage of the situation. But locking your doors. Also in Swatara Township, we talk about this a lot with people who leave for extended periods of time. If you go on vacation, you want to reach out to your local police department and fill out a vacation check form. This is something that Swatara Township does do for their residents. So if you go, let's say you go to the beach for a week, one of the things that you would want to do is actually reach out to our police department and fill out a vacation request form. And what our officers will do while you're on vacation is we will actually do a house check for you every midnight shift. So we'll go out to your home. We'll actually walk around your property and make sure all your doors are locked and make sure there's no suspicious activity taking place. And then we'll record that in the police report and actually forward that to you if you'd like to see when our officers were out there. In today's day and age, it's very easy to get smart electronics. So this kind of, goes into the question at the end here about my opinion on things like Amazon Ring. But since we're talking about it, the prices of smart electronics have come down significantly in the last year or two. So having things like light bulbs that turn on intermittently or randomly to make it appear as if somebody is in the home is also a good idea while you're on vacation. And those are relatively easy to set up. And I would say that the other big thing, and I harp on my wife for this too, is when you're on vacation, this is a big one. You really don't know who all is looking at your Facebook page and how they're going to gain access. I know there's ways that you can block people, you can block things from being public, but for most of us who like to post things on Facebook, you can gain a lot of information about somebody on Facebook. And you guys know that. Anyone who's on social media knows that. I mean, you can learn about people's names, what they look like, the inside of their home, whether they live in a fancy house or not, what kind of, valuables they have in their home. And then when you take that one step further, you can actually see when people are home or not. So it really bothers me when people go on vacation and they post that they're on vacation. They post pictures of their family at the beach and everything else. And really all you're doing is you're advertising that you're not at home at that time. And you just really never know who's going to take that information and use it to their advantage. So I always encourage people, not that you can't post things about your vacation, but what I would encourage you to do is just take those pictures and videos and post them after you get home. That's really a good practice to follow because you just never know. I say that my parents' home was actually burglarized when we were on vacation when I was a kid. This was before social media. So once you lose that safety aspect of your home, and once your home becomes violated, you have a hard time feeling safe in your own house anymore every time you leave. So to try to minimize being victimized of a burglary or some type of break-in, that's always a good practice. Is really be careful on social media. Aside from that, I know we talked a lot about odds and ends. Let me see here. I'm just looking over the exact list here. So for small businesses, really the best thing you can do for a small business is get a good security system. That is probably by far one of the best things you could do. I really can't tell you how many times we handle calls, and typically with businesses we're dealing with property crime issues. So the business was either vandalized, was broken into, burglarized, and possibly even a robbery. And so one of the best things you can do is having a good security system that has high definition cameras that have the ability to record infrared, and also have the capability of recording at least 30 days out, and that they're not looping every 5 or 7 days. A lot of times as a business owner, you may not actually know you've been victimized until a few days in, or if you do know immediately, by the time our detectives get out to you and they request any video footage, we find out a lot of times that the DVR already recorded over that video. So if you're going to get a video system, and you can get one, for under $1,000 with a few cameras and a cloud-based system that will allow you to record, HD quality video 24/7 and in the loop over X number of weeks. But that would be the biggest suggestion that I would have for somebody who's involved with a small business, or really any business for that matter. And that's only because the probability of solving a crime goes up exponentially if we have video of a suspect, especially if we have a physical description of that person, and or a description of a vehicle that was used. And the other thing, it protects you as a business owner from an insurance standpoint as well. You can see exactly what was taken, the fact that it brings validity to your police report as well. So first and foremost, for small businesses, for protection, I would definitely invest in a video system, a camera system. Both, first, I would take care of the interior of the business, and then second, if you have the ability to, you can incorporate cameras on the exterior as well. Personally, our police department, we've used Shearer's Locksmith. They're right off of Dairy Street there, right around the. So I know that they do a really good job. We've used them actually in our own police department. But for small businesses as well, again, kind of the same principles, is just being vigilant, and at any point in time, if anyone is attempting to rob the small business, conduct any type of force or violent crime, we always tell people, you don't want to get into a verbal battle with that person. You simply just do what they ask you to do, and just be the best witness you can be. And then you want to call 911 immediately. Obviously, get us the best description that you can. We're very fortunate in Swatara Township that we have a great response time. We can be anywhere in the township in about 5 minutes or less, lights and siren. So hopefully that would never happen to anyone listening to this, but if it did, one of those more horrific crimes, just make sure that you dial 911 immediately. The other thing too is, a lot of people don't realize, is you can text 911. In Dauphin County, we have that capability. I can't speak on behalf of other counties, but in Dauphin you can. So if you were to text 911, you would actually just put 911 in the phone number part of your app that you use for texting, and then you would just text your message. And then you're going to have a dispatcher from the communications center actually just text you back, and you're going to have that conversation with you. Even if you just dial 911 and leave your phone an open line, at least that's going to get an officer en route to your location. So if you don't have the ability to actually speak to somebody, but something bad is getting ready to happen, if you have access to your phone, dial 911 and just leave it an open line. And at the very least, they're going to send an officer out to check on that. So again, I know that that was a lot of information for everybody. Does anyone have any specific questions regarding family or personal self-protection?
Brennan, just going back to the business safety part, do you know of any incident where there's vandalism for, say, Chinese restaurants or any Asian business establishments since the outbreak?
Not at this time, although, but again, I'm running about 8 days behind because I don't have access to our record system at home here. So I do apologize, but to the best of my knowledge, I have not heard of anything right now being directed toward the community.
Thank you. So we have a question here asking, can 911 locate a cell phone location? Which I believe would be roughly yes, right? Depending on the cell tower.
Yeah, so the way that that works, they try to triangulate between Dauphin County Communications, the cell phone tower that it's actually hitting off of, and then the actual cell phone. Your cell phones actually are capable of submitting GPS coordinates even when they're turned off, believe it or not. So yeah, to answer your question, that they can, it's not exact. The cell phones are getting better. To give you a quick example of that, if you're out in an open field and we had to find somebody, you know, could we ping the cell phone and locate that person in the field? Most likely, yes. If you're in, let's say, a 20-story building, though, and we're trying to find you, we might be able to know that, you know, you're in a particular building, but we wouldn't be able to know what actual floor you're on. So, like I said, they are getting better, but yeah, it really depends on where you're at. And there you go. I guess it looks like Cumberland County is up and running with the text 911, so that's good.
Yeah, we do have members from various different counties, so we're trying to offer as much information as possible to cover everybody's needs. Yeah. So at this point, I think if anybody who has questions, please feel free to either use your mic or type it in the chat. It is a very valuable time to have Corporal here. So please, if you have any questions, there will be a great opportunity for you. We also, one other question that we had in the chat refers to perhaps if you have any recommendation about home security cameras. I don't know if, Brendan, you use anything like that at home, but I know of some of my friends that are actually having these installed at home. Do you find these helpful for private property?
Yeah, absolutely. And we can kind of jump into that. I know I can go back to gun safety tips as well. But again, carrying over the idea of protecting your business, obviously we want to definitely make sure that we carry that concept into our homes as well. So with home security systems becoming more affordable, like I said, you can get several cameras for your home for, you know, under $1,000, and a lot of these are cloud-based. So sometimes you might have to pay for storage. And the cloud is nothing more, for those who are not familiar with it, is nothing more but a separate location facility that has massive storage capabilities. So when we talk about recording on the cloud, all that means is that you're just not storing it in your house at that moment in time. It's being sent via, you know, signal to that storage facility, and they're storing it for you. So, and some companies, they do, depending on how much you're recording, how many cameras you have, it does tie up a lot of memory. So sometimes these security companies are charging you for cloud services. You really have to do kind of your research and find out, you know, what's going to suit your needs. I would say, again, the main things that you want to look at, because I can't necessarily recommend one company over another to you, but you know, the basic things that we already talked about would be keeping in mind that, you know, you want a camera that is going to have HD quality. capable of recording with infrared, which is going to take care of recording during low light situations. So, you know, obviously most burglaries and break-ins that we encounter occur in the evening at night. So you may not necessarily have good lighting when it occurs. So you want to make sure you get a camera that's capable of recording in the dark, number one. When you look at cameras like Amazon Ring, those are becoming very popular because when somebody comes up, actually I don't have one yet, but my other brother does. And if you're not familiar with Amazon Ring, it's simplistic to set up. So it's not complicated at all. And when it's activated by movement. So when somebody comes up to your front door, you can set this up in your phone. But when somebody comes, you know, close to your front door, you can get notified through your smartphone. So you have people, when you talk about porch pirates, if you're not familiar with that term, those are the people, and this is becoming, unfortunately, more prevalent as more and more people use services like Amazon and DoorDash and all these other home delivery services. We're seeing more and more porch pirates, and those are the people who are going around following, you know, mail trucks and UPS and FedEx trucks, and they're just waiting for those deliveries to be made to your front door, and then they're just walking up and taking your packages. So it's a different form of theft that we didn't really deal with a whole lot if you go back 10 years ago. But now with, you know, more and more people using Amazon and those types of services, unfortunately, we are starting to see more of these types of thefts. So when you have Amazon Ring is going to cover the area of your house where that package is most likely going to be left. So not only are you going to get a really good quality picture of the package being dropped off, but you're also going to get notified if anyone else gets onto your porch and tries to take that package. So the significance of that is you may be home when it happens. So if that notification comes right to your phone, because most people keep their phone with them even when they're at home, you're going to see that right away and be able to, you know, jump out the door and at least get a vehicle description, dial 911, and then hopefully we can intercept. Because chances are the person didn't know that you knew they took your package. So if you call the police, chances are they're probably following the delivery truck through the neighborhood and are probably going to try it again with somebody else. So we've had great success. I know other departments have recorded or have documented great success in solving some of these crimes with these thefts with Ring. And as you can see on the slide there, what it looks like, there's different versions out because it's been out for a little bit. But ultimately, these are all things that you can kind of control as far as how you want to set it up with your phone and how often you want it to come to you. You can actually, the other thing that's nice about Ring is, let's say you have somebody that comes to your door, and I also, going back to the whole locking your door thing, what I actually teach my kids and my wife is, even when you're at home, lock your door, lock your house door. If you're expecting somebody to come over, there's no reason why you can't just answer the door when they get there. But locking your door while you're at home is just a good practice to have. Obviously, it's going to ensure that nobody can just walk into your house. And when somebody does ring your doorbell or come to your front step, you know, look out the window first. See who it actually is. A lot of people don't have front doors that have windows with them. You may have a window that's near your front door. So just kind of take a peek out there, see who's standing out there. If it's somebody, and we run into this a lot in the summertime, if it's somebody who is soliciting in your neighborhood, a lot of times they like to solicit for all sorts of things: security systems, insurance, magazines, etc. In Swatara Township, we don't require a soliciting license or permit. So what all that means is anyone can come into Swatara Township and go door to door and try to, quote unquote, sell somebody something without registering first with the township. I don't know why the township got rid of that. We used to require people to actually register before they, you know, would solicit. But by having the Ring system, you can actually communicate with that person at your door without even opening the door. You can ask, you know, as similar to what you would see at a secured business or even a school. they would ring the doorbell, and you can talk to them right through the Ring system, which is kind of nice. And you can find out what their business is, who they are. And if you don't feel comfortable with them, remember, that is your property. You have all the right to tell them to leave. And if they choose not to leave, they are now trespassing onto your property. And at that point, it becomes a criminal offense. So, and you can just tell them, say, sir, if you don't get off my property, I am going to call the police. Call the police and get us out there as fast as you can. So having something like the Ring system at every exterior door in your house is a great tool, because typically if somebody's going to enter your home, that's where they're going to check first. And so you're automatically, you're going to get a snapshot of what that person looks like, which is kind of nice. And I think when we go back to the idea of criminals being opportunistic, they're going to start noticing these types of systems on houses, and typically we want them to leave your house alone. If they walk up to your doorstep and see that you have something like a Ring system, they may think twice about actually burglarizing your home. So it's a really good way to kind of curve that activity away from your home. Not that we want to push it onto somebody else, but at the end of the day, you got to look out for yourself. So, but yeah, that's first and foremost. Deadbolts, obviously, some people still don't have deadbolts. But again, going back to locking your windows, locking your doors, security systems, and just being vigilant are some of the best things. The other thing we talk about is adequate lighting. This is a big thing that we see, particularly in rural areas. So again, going back to opportunistic, if your house is well lit on the outside, well into the evening hours, and again, this is where technology has kind of caught up, and there's lights that obviously are motion sensor, and so you're not leaving a light on all night long, but it simply would turn on if somebody would walk by your property. Yeah, it might turn on when you get animals and whatnot, but for the most part, what you're more interested in is if somebody is walking onto your property after you've gone to bed, that light's going to turn on. You can actually get motion sensor lights that also have cameras in them. So not only is the light turning on, but it actually starts recording once it sees any motion. And that's a great way to deter criminals or people coming up to your home. But if you were to see a home, let's say it's 12 o'clock midnight, and you see a home that is well lit on the outside, you're less apt to walk up to that home and either case it for a burglary or, even think about breaking into it at that point. So a lot of times, criminals are targeting the homes that are, dark in a dark area, away from a lot of traffic, especially if you live in an area where, if you live in a cul-de-sac or, off a back road somewhere where it doesn't see a lot of vehicular traffic. These are things that you want to keep in mind, because these are the things that are going to deter people from taking advantage of you. Not leaving valuables in your car, locking your car. There's so many people that don't lock their cars still, and I really don't know why. Again, just simply locking your vehicle, and most vehicles come with built-in alarm systems. So if what we find a lot is the thefts from vehicles that we handle. Most of the theft cases are from vehicles that were actually unlocked, because they don't want to take that overt act of breaking out a window and potentially setting off a car alarm. So a lot of times, we have video of this, we have videos of people walking up to somebody's car that's parked in a driveway, pulling on the handle, and then moving on to the next house because the car was locked. So something very simple of remembering to lock your vehicle, sometimes that's enough to kind of deter that stuff. So, but yeah, that was kind of the long answer.
We do have a couple questions about gun safety. So one member asked, what is the fast way to open a gun safe case? Or if you have any suggestions about like a brand that would be the best in your experience.
Again, I can't recommend any specific brands, but again, a good resource would be Bass Pro Shops, actually right in Harrisburg there. They have a lot of gun safes that are available. You have Shearer Locksmith. They also have gun safes more on the smaller side. At the end of the day, you're going to find combo locks. You're going to find ones that are a little bit more sophisticated where they might actually require your fingerprint. at the end of the day, you want something. It really depends on where it's going, who's in your house, and the ease of accessibility you have. So sometimes things that are fingerprint, that require a fingerprint, sometimes they're not the greatest, because if you're really in a hurry to get that gun out, let's say you're sweating or you just got done washing your hands or something, you may not be able to get a good fingerprint. And at that moment in time is not the best time to be fidgeting around getting your gun safe open. So I'm not a big advocate of fingerprint-based security right now. I just don't think it's as trustworthy as just simply typing in a code. A lot of it, when it comes from a family, again, I have kids, is education. So if you have kids in the home that are not familiar with guns, you really have to make a personal call on that. I know some parents, they teach their kids, as early as, age 7 or 8, where the gun is and how to use it. As a parent, you have to kind of, use your own discretion and kind of look at that. Now, for my kids don't know where my gun is. That's just a personal choice of mine. My daughter is obviously old enough to stay at home by herself, and there's times that I leave her home with my son. So I figured, if they don't know where the gun is, there's less likely of that being misused. I'm getting to that point where I would like to take her out and actually show her how to use the gun and then go over those safety tips. There are junior firearms courses that you can take for kids. Most of your indoor gun ranges, like 717 Armory on Dairy Street, at the end of Dairy Street there. There's also Rapid Response in Lebanon County, which is on 422. They both have indoor gun ranges, and both of them offer safety courses. It's not a bad idea that if you're going to be having a gun in the home, especially if you're someone who's not prior military or prior law enforcement, to take one of those courses and just go over some basic, safety guidelines. The main thing that we teach in law enforcement is obviously, locking your gun up. You can have the ability to actually put a specific lock on the gun, so it's actually going through the barrel and out through the magazine. Out where you would put the magazine. And if you don't want to go that far, you can actually, or you can double up. You can actually have a safe on the gun itself, or a lock on the gun itself, and also keep it in a gun safe if you choose to. So doing simple things like not keeping a bullet in the chamber. That way, if somebody were to get in a hold of your gun, such as a child or somebody who's not familiar with it, a lot of times what we find with children is that when they pick up a gun, depending on the age of the child, they may not necessarily know if it's a real gun or not, because there are Nerf guns and fake guns out there, and they might think it's a BB gun, they might think it's a water gun, maybe it's something they saw in a cartoon somewhere. So again, on a younger child, the first instinct with a lot of kids is to just look at the gun and pull the trigger. They want to see what happens. So what do? They pull the trigger. And that's where those cases where you see, children, shooting siblings and whatnot accidentally occur, because they just didn't know what it was. When you're dealing with older kids, that curiosity is still there. So a good rule to have is, if you're going to keep a gun in the house, don't keep a bullet in the chamber. You can keep it loaded, but make it so that you would actually have to chamber a bullet, pull a slide back. Sometimes, if you have a gun that has a safety on it, that is one more step. So, if you're looking at a gun for your home, a pistol particularly, ensuring that it has some type of safety mechanism on it. We carry Glocks, so I actually have a Glock for my home here as a personal weapon, and Glocks don't have safeties on them. They're pretty much, pull the trigger and it goes. So, that may not be a model gun that you would want to have if you have young kids and you think there's a potential of misuse there. The other thing would be, keeping the gun in a secured area. A lot of people are worried about, their accessibility to a gun in a moment's notice. I would say the bedroom that you sleep in is a good place to keep it in. Obviously you wouldn't want to keep it out in the living room or underneath the couch or somewhere like that. You want it accessible to you and minimize the amount of foot traffic that goes in and out of that area where that gun is. So I think that's important as well. Once in a while, I hear of somebody being kind of old school about it and keeping a gun under the mattress. Obviously, I don't advocate for that. I know that I know someone who their grandfather, he always had a gun in the house. It was kept loaded and it was always under the recliner, and that's just how he was. He was just kind of old school thinking. I obviously would not advise that either, because whenever you bring a gun, whenever the gun's available, there's always at least one gun in that fight. So, and you're assuming that you always have access to that gun, and the wrong person won't. So if you're going to keep a gun in the house, just be smart about it, and keep it locked up, not keeping a bullet in the chamber. So it creates these overt acts that somebody would have to do, especially, children and people who aren't familiar with firearms. In order for them to fire that gun, they would actually have, chamber a bullet, so to speak. That's number one. And then also, educating your children, talking to them about, the safety rules that we use in law enforcement are very basic. So, for example, one of the rules, that the safety rule, is treating every gun as if it's loaded. If you remember that one safety rule, anytime you come in contact with a gun, you're always going to treat it as if it's loaded, which means you're not just going to pull the trigger. You're not just going to put the safety off. You're going to think of it as it's always loaded, even if it's not your gun. Another one would be not pointing that gun at something that you're not willing to shoot and destroy. That is a principal firearms rule. So not joking around, not pointing, even if it's unloaded, not pointing a gun at somebody for any reason. That's when misfires happen. Not keeping your finger on the trigger unless you have your target acquisition, and also you're willing to shoot and destroy that thing. So again, when you see police officers and military personnel carry firearms, you'll always see them carry it with their finger along the edge of the gun. They never hold it. If you look in the movies and on TV, that's why they keep their finger kind of straight along the barrel of the gun. That's training. That's firearms training, because we're trained from the academy on up to never keep our finger on the trigger unless we're willing to shoot something, until we're ready to shoot. So that's another thing. And then the final four, and the four main safety rules that we talk about, is target acquisition. You want to be aware not only of what your target is, but also what's beyond the target. So, if you were to take action with a firearm, that you're well aware of what is beyond your target, in case that bullet, misses your intended target. Is it going to hit somebody, behind that person? And we can kind of lead into the Castle Doctrine real quick here when we talk about gun safety tips. There's a lot of questions about what are your rights as a homeowner and a business owner when it comes to use of force, particularly deadly force. Not necessarily use of force, because that's usually a law enforcement term that we use, but I would say self-protection, so self-defense would probably be a better term to use. So let's say you're in your home and you have a right to protect your person and property, okay? So the Castle Doctrine has extended to, the outside of your home. So if somebody comes onto your property and they're refusing to leave, okay, but they're not threatening you or any family member, and they're not threatening any of your property, you can't just shoot them, okay? So, and for most people, some people actually believe that they would have the right to shoot somebody who's on their property who doesn't belong there. And unfortunately, that would not be the case. Now, if you have somebody who enters your home, an unwanted guest, so they break into your home, and let's say they don't break into your home. Let's just say you forgot to lock the front door, and you have somebody who walks right into your living room, and they pull a knife on you, and they demand you to give them, your wallet. At that moment in time, you have all the right, if you have a fear for your safety or the safety of somebody in your home, you have all the right to, fire a weapon at that individual, up to and including killing that person. Okay, you have that right because that person entered your home. It's the Castle Doctrine is what that's referring to. Now, So the legality part of things, it's important to understand that if you're going to be a gun owner and you're keeping a gun in the home, it's important that you do understand that so that you're not hesitant to take action. Here you have somebody who is coming into your home, who was not invited into your home, has no right to be there. And let's say you even take it one step further. You told them to get out of your home and they refuse to. And at this point, you have reason to believe and you have a fear for your safety or somebody else in your home. You have all the right to take action up to and including deadly force on that person. And there would be no criminal charges that would be filed against you in that case. Okay, that's something that's well documented. Now, on the same token, if if the person enters your home and they leave the home, let's say you tell them to leave, and they run out the front door because you scare them, and they go running down the street, you can't go running after that person and take them out at that point, because at that moment in time, that person left your home. There's no longer a fear of imminent danger to you or somebody else. And at that point, the legal standing would be a little different. So you really want to make that determination. But certainly if somebody's in your home and you're threatening you and or your property and they're refusing to leave, you have the right to protect yourself and property inside your home. So just kind of keep that in mind. Those are probably the main safety tips that I would offer for gun safety. Again, just know that for those of you who do own a firearm or are thinking about getting a firearm, I would strongly encourage you to take a firearm safety course if you don't have any familiarization with firearms, number one. Number two, I would also strongly encourage you to get a concealed weapons permit. The concealed weapons permit is going to allow you to carry that gun in your vehicle at all times, regardless of where you're going. And then it will also allow you to carry that upon your person, wherever you may go in the Commonwealth. Also understand that there are different gun laws, obviously, throughout the country. So depending on what state you're in, a lot of people want to bring their firearms, on vacation with them. My suggestion to you is, because every state is different, you want to make sure that you research the state that you're going to and see what they do and do not allow when it comes to firearms. A quick example of that would be New Jersey. New Jersey doesn't allow hollow points. So if your ammunition is a hollow point bullet, that would be illegal in the state of New Jersey. So that's kind of something that you want to be aware of, so that if you come in contact with law enforcement, you don't get in trouble for that. So you definitely want to make sure, most states, at least in this area, are going to allow you to carry that if you have a permit. Remember, with a weapons permit, that you are required, like a driver's license, to have that permit on you whenever that firearm is with you. So you definitely you don't want to make that mistake. If you are ever, we'll take it one step further, and then I know I keep going on with this, but it's a strong topic. But let's say you have a firearm and you have it in your vehicle. I get a lot of questions about, yes, I saw that the license reciprocity. You're on it, I tell you what. Let's say you have your firearm in your vehicle and you get pulled over by the police. What do? The first thing, the best practice, if you ever get pulled over around a traffic stop, particularly if you do have a firearm on you, keep your hands on the steering wheel up until the time that the officer gets up to your window. When the officer gets up there, you want to let them know that you do have a firearm in your car. Let them know that you do have a permit for that firearm, and then you want to let them know where that firearm is. Never, ever, ever reach for that firearm before the officer would either direct you to do so. But most cases, what's going to happen, I've done this before, as a precaution, because we don't know who you are. So it has nothing to do with necessarily thinking that you're going to shoot at us, as much as it is that for our own safety, we just don't know who you are and what your intentions are. So typically what would happen is an officer would ask you to step out of your vehicle at that point. They would put you in a place of safety, whether it's between both vehicles or just to the side, and they would actually recover your firearm from your vehicle, whether it's in the glove box or in the center console or behind you, and they would, make that firearm safe, unloading it or even just putting it in their patrol car, until the traffic stop has ended. Some officers, they may even say, if you can confirm that you have a firearms permit, they may feel comfortable keeping that firearm in the vehicle, and they may not take it from you. They may just say, okay, ma'am, or sir, don't reach for the firearm during this traffic stop, or else we're going to have problems. But, if it's in the glove box, just don't go into your glove box from now until the time that the traffic stop has ended. So, and then that's really just based on the officer and how comfortable they feel at that moment in time, allowing you to do, certain things with the firearm. So, does anyone have any questions, any other ones that maybe I didn't answer regarding gun safety?
For the permit, since now, I guess even municipality offices are closed because of the social distancing. If anybody wants one, is there a way to get it, you think?
Right now, there wouldn't be, because you actually would apply for a permit through the sheriff's office.
Okay.
You would have to go to the Dauphin County Courthouse to do that. And right now, the courthouse is closed to the public, so there's a little bit of lag time there.
I guess towards the end, we still need to cover one question, which I relayed early, the teenagers driving, safety tips.
Oh, yes. Okay, so that's a really good one. In fact, I want to make sure I get the exact legislature, because I want to make sure I give it to you guys correctly here. Bear with me just for a second here.
Okay. There's a question, also another question is, did you say you don't need a concealed carry permit if you are on your way to your business?
Correct. So if you're carrying that firearm to and from your business, you're not required to have the permit. The problem comes in, let's say you have a time where you're driving home from work and you have to stop by the grocery store to go pick something up. Well, now you're not taking a direct route from business to home. And at that point, could you technically be charged? You could, if an officer really wanted to push it. The statute is really designed that if you don't have your weapons permit, to allow business owners to take that weapon to and from their place of business, because the business, as if you're the owner, is an extension of the home. So that's really why it was written that way. So I would highly recommend that if you're going to be somebody who decides to take a weapon to and from a business, I would highly recommend you get a weapons permit just to avoid those situations. But that's a good question. Yeah, going back to the driving law. So the one that was passed within the last few years, sir, I don't have the exact date. But again, I want to make sure I got I'm going to just kind of look at this verbatim for you guys, just because it's been a while. I don't do a whole lot of traffic nowadays, but I want to make sure I gave you the correct information. So it's here, and I'm looking at the Pennsylvania law that was passed on passengers specifically. So in this case, drivers under the age of 17 are restricted to carrying no more than one passenger who is under 17 years of age during the first 6 months. And then these are things, a good resource for this is PennDOT.gov. So I don't know if CU, if that's something that you can bring up or not, but if you go to PennDOT.gov, there's a lot of laws that are under there that specifically, because parents do have a lot of questions involving, teenage drivers. But, most people know that, the most current legislation, teen drivers at age 16 can get their driver's permit. They have to have that for 6 months. Most of us at our ages, we remember, you could get your license after having your permit for a week. So I think that was a good change that the law made requiring, teens to get a little bit more practice. I will tell you now, not that, 13-year-olds are driving cars yet, but the leading killer of children ages 13 and younger is actually vehicle accidents. So when you look at, the safety of, passengers and people actually driving vehicles, a lot of it comes down to inexperience. So I would say that the crash center would probably support that there were less teenage-related accidents as there used to be, since we do require new drivers to drive for at least 6 months until they can actually apply for their license. But for some good practices would be number one, obviously obeying the law where they're not allowed to have anyone in the car under the age of 18 there. Let me go back to what I have here. Actually, so during the first 6 months of holding a junior driver's license, which is what your teenage driver would have, a teen may not drive with more than one unrelated passenger under the age of 18 in that vehicle. And that comes back to distracted driving. I would say the number one reason that people really get into accidents to begin with, believe it or not, it's not elements, driving elements. So driving elements would be malfunctions in vehicles and also weather-related elements. So, getting into a car accident because it was raining out, or getting into a car accident because there was snow on the ground. Obviously, those are reasons, or sometimes that we have multi-factor accidents that occur. However, most of the time when we actually investigate accidents, and this would go for teen drivers, but also for adult drivers, it would be anything related to distracted driving. So distracted driving, especially with cell phones, I know that there's apps out there that you can download on the kid's phone where you can kind of have some control as to whether or not they're on their phone. Unfortunately, I don't have a child who's driving right now, but I can rest assured I'll be researching those apps a little bit more intensively. When my daughter starts driving in a year, as far as ensuring that she's not texting while driving. The biggest thing with teenagers is if you limit the amount of passengers that they do have, and that's why that law was written that way, to limit the number of underage passengers so that you don't have a group of teenagers in the car that are carrying on. And then, of course, the driver is left being distracted, and that's how accidents occur. Another thing would be understanding the seatbelt law. Pennsylvania, I'm not sure why they never changed this, but the seatbelt law, seatbelts statistically do save lives. That's first and foremost. A lot of people, they make the argument that, well, what if their vehicle caught fire, or what if their vehicle, ran off the side of the road and went into a lake? Would they be able to get out of the seatbelt and out of the car? I can tell you, statistically speaking, that is such a low percent of accidents that we actually handle, that the probability of that occurring in lieu of you actually getting into a major accident where the driver is actually expelled out of the car because they didn't have a seatbelt on, there's just no comparison. You're more likely to die from not having a seatbelt on than you are in an incident where your seatbelt was on and you weren't able to get out of the vehicle, if that makes sense. So when you have teenage drivers, ensuring that they're wearing seatbelts is first and foremost. They do save lives, number one. Understanding the seatbelt law. So when it comes to the seatbelt law, there's primary offenses and there's secondary offenses. The primary offense law covers minors. So anyone in a vehicle under the age of 18 is required to have a seatbelt on, regardless of their seating position. When you have drivers or passengers over 18 years of age or older, the driver and the front passenger are required by law to have their seatbelt on, but someone sitting in the back seat wouldn't necessarily, and these are actually secondary laws. So a secondary law is one where a police officer would actually have to pull you over for a primary violation. So, for example, if you're 18 years of age or older and you don't have your seatbelt on and you're driving down the road, a police officer cannot pull you over simply because you don't have your seatbelt on. They have to pull you over for some other primary offense, whether you're speeding, running a stop sign, didn't use a turn signal, whatever. When they pull you over, they have the ability to write you a citation, not only for the primary offense, but also for the seatbelt violation. When it comes to teenage drivers or those, minors that are 16 and 17 years of age, it is a secondary offense, or I'm sorry, a primary offense across the board. So a secondary offense would be for people 18 years of age or older. A primary offense would be for 16 and 17-year-old drivers, where they could be pulled over simply for not wearing a seatbelt, and there would be no underlying circumstance. The problem with law enforcement is that we have to kind of use our own discretion to determine whether or not we feel that that driver is 16 or 17 years of age, or if we think that they're older than that, then we have to pull them over for a primary offense at that point. Okay, if that all makes sense. Hopefully I didn't confuse anybody on that. But so just kind of, reflecting back, number one, distracted driving. So I would encourage your teenage drivers, even as a parent, a lot of parents forget this. Driving is not a right, it's a privilege. So if you have a teen driver who, whether it's driving related or not, let's say they, their grades start to slip, or, they don't listen to you and they take the car without asking, or whatever it may be. I always tell parents, if they're not going to listen to your rules as a parent when driving, take their driver's license. You have the right to do that. Physically, just take their driver's license. And then at that point, legally, they cannot be driving. Now, we all know that if the child wants to rebel and, they want to take the car anyway and they don't have their license, well, at that point, these calls are far and few between. I can't say in my career that I've ever had a parent call me and say, hey, my son just left with the car. Can you go pull him over? Not to say that it couldn't happen, but technically, take their license from them and say, you're not getting this back until you, follow my rules. And those would be wearing your seatbelt, limiting the number of passengers. And I would say even passengers who are adults are distracting in that vehicle. So, limiting the teenage driver to maybe one person in the car, and that one person would have to be an adult. That's a good rule to have. And also, obviously, there's guidelines that they have to follow. If they're on a junior driver's license, they can't drive past 11 p.m. And any earlier than 5 a.m. unless that's changed. I haven't looked at that law in a while, but hopefully I believe that those are still the times that they call that the Cinderella rule. But obviously, if they're not driving at night during inclement weather and those types of situations, they've included that in the permit restrictions. So when you have a teenage driver who's just learning how to drive, one of the requirements is they have to drive in inclement weather for X number of hours, which I think is obviously a good thing to have. But the other thing would be alcohol-related offenses. So I would encourage you to, talk to your teenage driver, if those of you who have them, that if they're ever in a situation where maybe they're at a party and they made a poor decision to, have alcohol and commit underage drinking, encourage them that even if that were the case, to at least contact you and get a ride home. I wouldn't necessarily say, call an Uber or a Lyft driver at that point. But of course, if they're in that situation, that would be a better option than them driving intoxicated. I can tell you, DUI related crashes sometimes are very horrific. And unfortunately, 9 times out of 10, what we see is in DUI related crashes, a lot of times the damage is mostly done to the driver who was not intoxicated. Whereas, the person who was driving drunk a lot of times ends up not having any injuries. I think a lot of that is, their body's really relaxed. and they don't get as bad of a whiplash, so that the airbags and such are actually able to do their job. And a lot of times we see more severe injuries with vehicles that are struck by drunk drivers. We see more injuries in the vehicle that was struck by the non-intoxicated individual. So just having that conversation with your child and saying, listen, if you make the mistake of going to somebody's house or a party and you end up drinking, I would much rather have you call me and have me pick you up. I'm not going to be mad at you for drinking, or, we can have that discussion later, but the last thing I want you to do is get into that vehicle and drive intoxicated. At that point, they're taking their life and anybody else is on the roadway into their own hands. And it's just something you don't want to mess with, let alone the criminal ramifications for it, because the DUI law is written as such that it doesn't take a whole lot. In fact, the legal limit for a minor, and a minor in this case would be anyone under the age of 21, not 18, any alcohol above a 0.02 blood alcohol content is actually illegal. And a 0.02 blood alcohol content is not a lot. So it doesn't take very much. That's a great resource that you're looking at there. Ooh, there you go, right in front. So that's great. Yep, 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. That's good that hasn't changed yet, so that's good. And then the sanctions for the high-risk drivers under 18. Yeah, that's all good. But again, going back to DUIs, I think that's, again, understanding that a teenager getting their license is a privilege, not a right. And as quickly as they got it, being the parent, sometimes you kind of have to hold that over their head. But just make sure that that teenager knows that, the worst thing they could do is drive intoxicated. We won't get into marijuana-related offenses, but that's still driving under the influence of a controlled, well, at this point it's a controlled substance, but it's not going to be very, very much longer. But, my fear is that we're gonna start to see more drug-related DUIs. We've already started to see that. So, but I would say, just to kind of recap for teenage driving, limit the number of people in the car. I'd say no more than one. Wearing their seatbelt, and also, just practicing, not to be on their phone while they're in the vehicle.
No, thank you.
Yeah. So those are the main points that I would recommend to everybody.
I think we're running short on time here. If anybody has any last minute question? No, I don't see anything here.
Yeah, we can always.
Yeah, we can follow up with questions if any comes up. Yep.
Thank you very much, Corporal Pokrop. It really has a lot of information. I guess what we can do is we can summarize in Chinese and then send it out as a little bit memo, send out to our members, because some people they're not very comfortable to attend this for pure, no translation seminar. So we probably can do an additional service, translate for them, give some tips. I think today we had a variety of topics are really good and very handy and useful. And I'm sure if we in the future encounter any other questions or concerns from our members, we'll forward the questions to you.
Oh, absolutely. It was my pleasure. I was very honored to be your guest speaker today. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Hopefully you got something out of this, and it was very much very pleasurable to talk to everybody and answer your questions. And of course, if you guys have any follow-up questions, please let me know, and I'll do my best to field those through email or phone call or whatever we need to do.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. As always, it's good to see you.
Thank you. We really appreciate your support for the community. And as you might be able to see, a lot of members are saying thank you to you. So I will definitely write another email to you to show my gratitude, but definitely it's much appreciated. Thank you.
Absolutely. Anytime, and please continue to stay in contact.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you everybody for joining us too.
Take
Have a
care.
good night.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Everyone,
Thank you for organizing this.
seminar.
for us.
Mhm.
You're welcome.